Record. Okay, here we go. All right,
Very good.
we are live.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Cool. So yeah, I analyzed the 6 sites in contention and did a little analysis for each one. So yeah, we'll just get right to it. So actually, before we get into the site, so quick overview of the site analysis criteria. Give me 1 second. Okay. The site analysis criteria that we focus on, Spohn Ranch, when evaluating potential locations for skate parks. There's 6 of them. There's visibility, accessibility, the design canvas, and design canvas encompasses a couple considerations. Is there enough space to do a skate park? What's the shape of the space? Is it this weird circle or this weird triangle? Is there a weird, shape to it that's going to create a challenge from a, skateboarding traffic pattern perspective? Topography, is it a big hillside? Is it flat? Drainage, what are the drainage conditions? Things like that. And a few other things. So that's design canvas. Then we have barriers to shovel ready. That means, the key consideration there is, does the municipality already own the property, or does it have to be purchased? Most of the time the property is already owned by the municipality, so they don't have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars purchasing a property and then have no money left over to actually build the skate park. So that's the key consideration there. Does the agency already own the property? And then also looking at demolition and things like that. Is there a massive building there that would have to be demoed, or is it just open grass area, things like that. Then we have amenities and infrastructure. So ideally, the site has all these amenities already existing, so they don't have to be built from scratch. If they have to be built from scratch, not the end of the world. Again, similar to above, it kind of just takes away from your budget for skate park if you have to, spend money to build a parking lot or a restroom, drinking fountain, things like that. And then lastly is impact to surrounding environment. So there's a few components to this, but the main one is homes. So a lot of skate park projects, less so these days, but definitely back in the early days of skate parks, a lot of skate park projects got shot down because of NIMBYs. Not in my backyard. It's going to cause too much noise. I don't want to hear the noise. So the key consideration here for this criteria is how close is the skate park to homes, and do we feel like there's going to be a noise impact in a negative way that could derail the project. So those are the 6 criteria that I evaluated each site based on. So starting with the first site, it's Dearborn and Frisco. It's the area underneath the overpass. You guys may have a different term for it or description of it, but that's what I'm calling it, Dearborn and Frisco. So the yellow dash line is the area under consideration. So looking at visibility, so it's highly visible from Dearborn and Frisco, but the overpass columns could present kind of a hiding spot, and then also there's a lot of shade and shadows under there. So it's a highly visible site. I'm just not scoring it a 10 out of 10 just based on some of the shadows and kind of dark spots based on the columns. But overall, fairly visible. Accessibility, so it's obviously near residential, as you can see, but it is fairly south. So it's not very centralized, either in the north-south or the east-west. And then pedestrian access is a bit limited as well. Currently, there's not, a plethora of sidewalks leading to this space. So some of that would likely need to be created from scratch. The design canvas, obviously it's fairly flat, ample square footage, more than enough space to do a good skate park. But I have done a couple overpass projects in the past, and they do present challenges. Most of the time you have to stay away from the columns. There's a certain offset. And then just depending, I've worked with TxDOT a couple times. I've not worked with KDOT yet, but just based on my experience, they present a lot of challenges. And if that's the only site you got, great. But if there's other sites, then I would recommend staying away, just because the columns and the KDOT requirements are just going to present a lot of headaches, and also just increase the amount of time I'm sure they may be accommodating and we can work our way through it. It's just going to be probably a lengthy process. So, and that ties into the barriers to shovel ready. So no real demolition requirements, basically just grass under there. But the KDOT right of way is likely going to present a pretty lengthy permitting and review process. So something to keep in mind there. Amenities and infrastructure, as you can imagine, nothing that really exists there right now. So all of that would have to be created from scratch. And then impact to surrounding environment. So in this sense, I think it's a net positive impact because basically that's an underutilized space. I don't think you guys are really using it for anything else. And again, if you had no other sites, great, perfect space for a skate park. But based on those other issues I mentioned, I think we can look elsewhere, even though it would, revitalize kind of an underutilized space. So overall impact is a net positive. There's a little bit of residential to the north, but it's far enough away. And based on, the cars, zipping by overhead, any noise from a skate park would easily blend in with ambient noise levels before it hits those homes. So that's not really a concern there. So I'll stop there and then we can chat about this one, or we can chat about all of them at the end, however you want to do it.
I'm fine with you just kind of running through everything you've done for all of the sites, and maybe we debrief after.
Yeah, for sure. And at the end, I rank all the sites. So I actually go through and score them. So this site is one I don't think should be considered further. Then 5 of them are all kind of within the same range of like, yeah, these could all work. And then I have one that scored higher than the rest, which is my top candidate. But pretty much anyone other than this, I think could be up for further consideration. All right, so next is Dearborn and Kelly. All right, so site is obviously, it's smack dab in the middle of a residential area, and so obviously highly visible in every direction, so great visibility. Accessibility, it's very centralized, both east-west and north-south, and yeah, very, very easy to get to, and there's residential all around, so you're definitely going to have a lot of people using the facility. There's a bit of a lack of sidewalks in this area. I don't know if that's unique to this area or not, but that kind of, the score gets a little ding there just based on the lack of, sidewalks leading up to the space. The design canvas, so the topography seems fine. There's a couple potential footprints within this area. I think there's about 3, if I had to pick kind of 3 areas within this overall site. That's kind of what I'd be looking at. I think there's about 3 of them. They would be on the smaller end, however. So I think they could work definitely for a phase 1 and get you guys a good, skate park on the smaller end. But it would limit potential for future expansion. I'm not sure if that's something you're interested in, but I do want to mention it. And also, you don't have to do expansion. If you say, we want to do a small skate park here, and then let's do another one in a different part of town. So even if you decide, hey, we want to do another skate park in the future, you don't necessarily need to expand upon this one. You could just do another one at a different site. So not the end of the world, not a deal breaker in my opinion, but did want to mention it. So the property is city owned, minimal demolition, just removing some grass essentially. Amenities infrastructure, there's an existing parking lot with 20 paved spaces roughly. There's obviously street parking all around, and there's existing restrooms at the swimming pool, and then several shade trees throughout. So from amenities perspective, it scores pretty well. All right, so impact to surrounding environment. The couple potential skate park footprints within this site, like I said, there's about 3 of them. They are closer to residential than I would typically recommend. However, this is an active park with, I haven't been there, but I imagine, on a Saturday and whenever it's open, you have the sounds of kids playing and yelling and screaming, and it's park activities happening. So based on sound studies that have been done for skate park projects in the past, likely the skate park would not be any noisier than the basketball game or the kids playing in the pool, anything like that. But there's a potential, perception issue, and you may run into some, NIMBY issues with residential in this area. So a little closer than I'd prefer, but I don't think it's necessarily a deal breaker. All right, next is State and Sunflower. All right, so this site is, again, highly visible from every direction, so great visibility. It's fairly centralized, both east-west, and north-south. It's adjacent to a school, which is great, so as soon as the kids pile out of school there, they can just head straight to the skate park, so that's always good. And then it's obviously located in the heart of a residential area. Again, similar to that previous site, there is kind of a lack of sidewalks in this area, which is going to slightly diminish your pedestrian access, but not a deal breaker in my opinion. The design canvas, similar to the last site, I think there's 3 potential areas within the site that could work for a skate park. And yeah, the topography is fine. No major issues I'm seeing from a design canvas perspective. Barriers to shovel ready, similar to the previous one, it's city owned, no real demolition constraints to be aware of. Amenities and infrastructure, so there's no formal parking lot that I'm aware of. There's looks like plenty of street parking, however. And then looking at your original document, you said there are existing restrooms, but that they would require upgrades to be available for year-round use. So they got some it's got some amenities, but would need a little bit of upgrading, is my takeaway. And then lastly, impact to surrounding environment. So similar to the previous site, these 2 sites are fairly similar in a number of ways. They are, especially, on the north and then the west, we're a little close to homes. On the east side, we got the school, so not really a big deal. And then on the south, it doesn't appear to be as much of an issue. But on the north and the west, we've got residential that is a little bit closer than I would typically like, but I don't think it's a deal breaker. And I think similar to the last one, this is an active park, with the noises of active recreation, going on throughout the day. So I don't think a skate park would elevate the noise levels considerably. I think the difference would be negligible. And I think there's enough space within this site where we could kind of pull the skate park away from the residential areas to create enough of a buffer zone to really minimize those noise impacts. All right, next is Ohio and Fanny. So the site is highly visible from Ohio Street, and then the parking lot to the north. So that's great for law enforcement if they want to just, drive by or just pull into the parking lot quick. The visibility does decrease a bit as you get, further into that southeast corner and kind of get into those trees. You can't see it so well from the road, but overall still fairly visible. Accessibility, it's fairly centralized in the east, west, and north-south directions. Again, it's adjacent to a school, which is great. And then you got the residential area to the, that might have meant west. Might have to fix that. And then this site does have sidewalks. So there's some existing pedestrian sidewalks along Ohio Street. So that's good. Design canvas, plenty of space. Topography, it looks like to be fairly flat, ample square footage. And what's good about this site that I did want to mention is more than enough space. So you can definitely look at doing a future expansion at this site. You're not going to be able to fill out this whole site with some of the preliminary budget numbers we were talking about. So definitely a long-term planning type space. Next, barriers to shovel ready. So demolition requirements are minimal, just turf and topsoil essentially. But the site is on school district property, and you would have to fill me in more on that. What kind of coordination would be required with the school? I've seen that go very smoothly in the past, and then I've seen it go terribly wrong in the past. So it could go either way, depending on the school district and the relationship there. But that is something to consider, and will likely require a bit more coordination versus one of your city-owned properties.
And so what I would say on that, Vince, is when we initially put together all of the possible sites in town, we didn't limit ourselves in any way. We said what possible spaces are available may have amenities or may be a good fit. So I can't say that this is even necessarily an option. I don't think we've had that detailed conversation with the school district, but that's why it
Mhm.
was on a list as a possibility. So we weren't limiting ourselves from potential good sites.
Yep, makes sense. All right. Amenities and infrastructure. There is a large parking lot to the north. There's some existing electrical infrastructure in the area, but no restroom and no drinking fountain that I could see. So that is a downside. Then lastly, impact to surrounding environment. So there is a small residential area to the south. Looks like about 3 homes would be potentially impacted by this. But as I mentioned, the site is very large. So we could kind of hug the skate park up onto that north side. And then we could be, you know, a good 250 feet away from the homes. And at that point, it wouldn't even be an issue of the noise impact. So not too concerned about that there. And then I'm not sure what this site is used for. It appears to be nothing. Again, it would be kind of taking underutilized area and turning into something really cool and something highly usable. So that's a net positive in my mind.
And again, that is something we'd have to explore with the school because it may be something that they utilize in association with track and field events or practices or something. Again, we're just not super familiar with how it's used. And so that would take a lot more conversation with the school to know whether this is viable or not.
Yep, for sure. All right. How do you say this one?
Shryock.
Shryock. Okay. Shryock Park, beautiful park, really beautiful, right on the lake. There's a couple potential footprints I see within here, probably about 3 or 4 of them. The potential skate park footprints would be highly visible, both from Ohio Street and that large parking lot in the center. And then also there appears to be an access road that goes along, looks like, oh, I cut off the word lake there. So I'll have to fix that. Yeah, and along the access road along the lake would have, you know, good visibility as well. So overall, great visibility. Accessibility, it's on the northern tip of the city, so not very centralized in that sense, but it is adjacent to several residential areas to the north, south, and east. And it appears sidewalk access does exist, but not from every direction, just based on what I'm seeing with Google Earth and Google Street Views.
And so one of the things we're working on, Vince, we actually have a road project on that north-south arterial directly adjacent that is planned for this year. And as part of that project, we are going to be building a trail extension due south to connect to the rest of the sidewalk network on Ohio Street. So there will be a lot more connectivity in the future that runs due south and hits a lot more neighborhoods and goes all the way to the south end of town.
Okay, nice. Good to know. Okay, so the design canvas topography appears manageable. As I mentioned, there's a couple potential footprints I'm seeing within here. The proximity to the lake, typically that's going to mean we can't really dig down because of the water table. So that's going to limit our potential for below grade terrain. And the community may not want below grade terrain, but that is a certain style of skate park. So at this site, that the opportunities for that would likely be limited, but not the end of the world. Even if you want to do a bowl or a pool type structure, you can still build up to do that. So not the end of the world. Barry's shovel ready. As with a few of the others, this is straightforward, city owned and minimal demolition. Amenities and infrastructure. Obviously, this checks all the boxes for amenities. It's got great parking lot, restroom, shade trees, electrical infrastructure, all that. So it scores really well in that sense. And then lastly, impact surrounding environment. So the residential areas are far enough away that that's not really a factor at all. And then I did want to touch on some of the other amenities within this park. Ideally, you don't want a skate park, 5 feet away from a playground, because now and then a skateboard will shoot out of the skate park. So you want buffer zones between your skate park and your other amenities such as playground, basketball court, whatever. This site is large enough that you could easily create large enough buffer zones so that the skate park is kind of on its own and insulated from other amenities and you do have that proper buffer zone. So from an impact perspective, I don't see any issues. All right, and the last one is Garvin Park. This is the one that I don't think was on your list, but Aaron looked at, or you and Aaron looked at when he visited. So we kind of put this back on the table for consideration. So good visibility from the road to the east. I could not find a name for that road, but whatever that road is to the east. But the visibility starts to decrease as you get kind of further west into the site. There's a lot of trees, obviously. So the further we go into that site, to the west and to the south, the visibility starts to get a little bit poor. So just a consideration. Accessibility, it's centralized north-south, but it's on the far western edge of the city, so it's not very centralized east to west. It is adjacent to residential areas, but as far as I could tell, pedestrian sidewalk was lacking a bit in this area. The design canvas, topography looks manageable. There's a couple footprints within this overall site that I think could work. Site is fairly dense, however, there's a lot of stuff going on, and there's a lot of trees. So working around that existing infrastructure and those existing trees could present some design challenges. Not a deal breaker, but definitely I see some challenges. And then similar to the previous site, the proximity to the lake likely means we've got a high water table, which would limit the potential for below grade terrain. Barriers, city owned, basically taking out some grass, potentially a few small trees. I don't like taking out big trees, but we may need to take out a few small trees. Amenities, there's no formal parking lot that I could see. There appears to be, enough street parking. This park seems to function without it somehow, so I don't see that as a deal breaker. And it looks like there are existing restrooms and some electrical infrastructure already, so that's good. And then lastly, impact surrounding environment. Residential seems to be far enough away that doesn't appear to be a concern. And then I think the site is large enough that we could create those necessary buffer zones between the skate park and, let's say, the playground or the baseball diamond, whatever it's nearby. We could create enough of a buffer zone based on the available space. All right, so those are the 6 sites. Oops, here we go. All right, so here's the scoring for those 6 sites. So as I alluded to, Dearborn and Frisco is on its own, did not score very well for a number of reasons. But the big one, or the couple big ones in my mind, are the lack of amenities and then the barriers to shovel ready. Just that KDOT process, it feels daunting and feels like it could present challenges. So I just don't think it's worth going down that road. Then, as you'll see, there's a few sites that are all kind of, hovering around that same range. So you've got Dearborn and Kelly at 43, State and Sunflower at 44, Ohio and Fanny at 44, and Garvin Park at 42. So these 4 are kind of all hovering around that same 43, 44-ish score. So definitely good sites. Don't see a need to take them off the table. And then Shryock Park is kind of stands on its own. It's not like a 58 out of 60, but it is definitely a few points above this kind of grouping right here. So that's kind of on its own as at least my personal preferred location for the skate park, just based on the great visibility, the great existing amenities, the ample amount of space. We don't have residential butted right up to it. So for a number of reasons, I'm really liking Shryock Park. But I think any, basically, like I said, any except this one, I think could work. So those are my thoughts. So yeah, I'll open it up to you guys for your thoughts and any questions.
Yeah, so my question, I want to pose this to Brian regarding Shryock. I know that we have dug up there in the past. We've planted trees. We've done other projects. beyond water table. It may not even be water table depending on where you're at in that park, because there is a good elevation drop off as it works its way down to the lake. But I know that there's a lot of shallow rock and it's just hard to dig because of the rock up there. But any thoughts in that regard on Tryout?
I like you said, the rock's going to be an issue, but if you can build above ground, like Vince said that you could, I think that would be a good spot. I wasn't pulling up the presentation. Was that on the south side? Was that over there by the splash pad area?
Just kind of had the whole park highlighted, I think.
Yeah, we didn't get into specific locations within Shryock, but just looking at it really quickly, I mean, you're looking at maybe like in here-ish, and then further, just a very rough, obviously, at first glance.
What he's drawing, Brian, you can't see the visual at all?
No.
Okay,
no.
So what he's drawing is basically the inner loop inside the trail network, the trail that we built up there. And there's the spot that's just north of the large shelter, that big open space kind of out near the point. And then there's
so that
he's got three spots.
My concern. Yeah, because that place during spring, summer, and fall, rented out 2 to 3 times on Saturday and Sunday and all throughout the week. And I don't know about noise level. I know the playground's there, but I think it's a little different noise from little kids and then, teens over there. So I have no problem building a park over there. I just want to be wary about putting it close to that big shelter out there.
So that's the first site. The second one is just south of the new parking lot, north of the drainage ditch. So that open space by the smaller shelter.
Okay.
So that's the second one.
I think those.
And then the third option is due south of the splash pad in that big open space where the loop comes down to the point at the south end of the park.
Okay. Well, that'll be perfect. I like all that stuff around the splash pad and all that stuff. So, and like you said, Vince, you don't see any issues with construction if you can't dig down. You'd have to just build up. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's totally fine.
Okay.
Yeah, many of our projects are above grade, so I don't see that as a deal breaker.
Yeah, the challenge we ran into a splash pad was just the shallowness of the rock, and there's a lot of rock up there. And so if you got down a couple of feet and didn't hit it, that would be pretty fortunate in a lot of locations. Cody, what'd you say?
Yeah, so I was just going to say that the third area that was denoted in Shryock Park, kind of straight south of the splash pad. One of the things that I'm going to have to do this year is go through and put in some sort of parking area for the boat, the fishermen, so they have place to park. And we've talked about this for a couple of years now. That's something that's on my radar for this spring to finally get that taken care of. And so I was going to note that. And I think that would still be south of the walking trail. So I think we've got plenty of room to address that. But then another thing that I'm going to be working on here this spring, hopefully before the spring, is a connecting sidewalk that goes from the bridge that goes over the drainage back to the small pavilion, but then also to that pedestrian trail along the east edge of Shryock Park.
So Vince, what he's referring to, I don't know if you can see it, but right in the middle of the park, there's a small pavilion. It's north of that drainage. Okay, right there. Yep. You would be talking about extending kind of south and east and going over the drainage ditch and then, to now turn right and connect. Yeah, something in that general area.
Okay.
We would be connecting a pathway loop.
Yeah,
there's a small bridge over the drainage ditch right now that would be the center point.
Okay. Yeah, it wouldn't bow that far south. It would hug closer to the splash pad, but it's in that general area.
Okay. Got it.
But again, I think given the parking for the fishermen and the trail or the sidewalk extensions, I think there's still ample room to put in the skate park with no problem.
Yeah, so Vince, a couple of thoughts on the other locations. I think you're right that in a lot of our parks, given where they're located, you are going to have fairly shallow water table issues.
Yeah.
Um, you're also going to have rock pretty much anywhere in our community. Unfortunately, we don't get to dig in the city without running into a lot of rock. So a lot of it's going to be above ground. Um, just to give it the best chance possible and see if you knew this about it, because I know folks will ask, but the Dearborn and Frisco option, about a block and a half, maybe 2 blocks due west, we are working on a trail project that should be done here this coming year that will run all the way across that side and then connect to the downtown area. And less than 2 blocks west is a public plaza with a welcome center. There are public restrooms. There are restaurants and places and things where you can, buy drinks and stuff like that. So I know it's not directly on site, but just wanted to throw that out there in terms of connectivity and access to restrooms and other things. That is something that would improve in the general vicinity, but it's still about 2 blocks away from where this is at.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't know that changes the score much, but I just want to make sure that when we go through the process with Park Board that they have full information on every site and that all of that gets considered.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that would bump it up a few points, but still, I think there's a few other issues too. Like I said, if this is your only site, I would say let's do it. Great site. Let's make it happen. But I think there are other sites that are a little bit better, just based on the KDOT and some of the requirements they're going to have for designing terrain around those columns. It varies from state to state, but typically they're going to be pretty rigid with their requirements.
So the other thing that I will share, just from a strategy perspective, so what we have budgeted is $75,000 from the city. But one of the things that we had intended on doing, and some of this is contingent on the site that we choose, is to try to use that not just as the cost of the park, but potentially as a cost match for a grant program. And we do have a couple of spaces here in town that we think we would be willing to consider, either because they're already eligible or because making them eligible wouldn't really impact the development of the park all of that much. But there's a grant program in April called Land and Water Conservation Fund, LWCF grant. We have been successful in those grants in the past, and we're able to get a playground covered 50-50. So we have that going from a development perspective, that we're looking at the 75 not necessarily as the end all be all.
Sure.
And potentially utilizing our selection here and then a design process to go after that bigger option to try to get in that 150,000 range. Now we still want Park Board and the City Council and the public to sign off on that idea, but that's the way I've been approaching it. I also have an individual that has contacted me and is working with, I guess, the Skatepark project, Tony Hawk Foundation. Sounds like they changed their name.
Yeah, they changed their name.
Okay, so he's got a few folks that he's working with there and potentially doing a grassroots fundraising effort for it as well. So that's going to be something we want to wrestle with the Park Board and decide if they like that option. And obviously, worst case scenario, if it had a phasing type component where maybe this is what gets built initially, but it can easily be interconnected into a larger plan. That's kind of what I have in my mind right now, but I definitely need more people to be a part of that conversation and to sign off on those ideas. So I think my thought was, take what you've done for us here, because we kind of did this informally in our own respects, but again, not being skate park folks, just basing off the best information we had. I think that this is good information for us to be able to share with our Park Board, with our City Council, with the community, and to really get this conversation going. Because I think that if nothing else, if we can at least get a location picked out and rough conceptual, then that should allow us to apply for some of these grant programs.
Absolutely.
And maybe expedite this a lot more quickly if we can get past this initial phase. So that's my thoughts. I don't have anything else to share. Brian, Cody, anyone else? Happy to have you comment on what you've seen or any other feedback we can give to Vince on any of these sites.
I don't have anything additional.
I did want to get some clarification on the Dearborn and Frisco site because the location appears to be directly under the bridge, but it looks like the city owns the property that actually, that is on the north and the south of the highway as well. Is that intended? Yes. Was that intended to be part of that?
That's all city property, so.
Right, okay.
But in terms of whether it has to be under the bridge, I pose that question to me, what your thought was. Other than the KDOT complication, I assume most other aspects of the site analysis are the same regardless, but the overpass introduces the KDOT complication.
Yeah. So I was looking at your original document, which outlined this same area that I outlined as primarily underneath the overpass.
Right. That whole triangle is city property, though.
Okay. Yeah. So that would change things fairly considerably if it's more of this triangular area, and we can stay away from the columns. The columns are the big thing because they're going to have restrictions and requirements around that because they're going to need to get in there to do maintenance and whatever else. So if we're not underneath there, then this site is a lot better. So let's see here. So visibility would be better. Accessibility doesn't change. So it still wouldn't score great there, but you mentioned there's some new stuff happening. The design canvas would score much better. The barriers shovel ready would score much better. Amenities, it would still be lacking, although you said there's some stuff, a few blocks away, but it still wouldn't score great there. And then impact, well, it scored well for impact already, so that would stay the same. So yeah, I could see that kind of, I don't think it's going to jump up to the, top preferred site, but I think it's definitely could jump that up into this grouping here in the kind of mid 40s.
So Vince, if maybe if you shoot us an updated table just with the change in that factor analysis, just to show that, and then we can share all of this with the park board and maybe even with council and community, however we want to move forward with this conversation, and then we can run it from our end and see what people think about the analysis.
Sure. Okay, just to make sure we're on the same page, does that look about right?
It actually, it follows the entire triangle all the way up to the top.
Okay.
That's all city property.
Okay.
On both sides.
Cool. Okay. Yep. I can update that. And then, I did catch a few typos, so I'll update that as well.
Perfect. Okay. Well, we definitely appreciate your time, Vince. And I think if you can just get those couple of updates made, we will present this to the park board, and I certainly appreciate you recording this because now that gives us something we can even share with them and with the council and let people know what we're looking at and why. Just in case anyone is watching this video later, we at the park board level had started with 20 something sites throughout the community, and a lot of it boiled down to, I think, how we got to some of our top choices is when you start going outside of developed parks, you start losing points fairly quickly for all of the other amenities and all of the other things that go along with it. But we did have sites picked throughout the entire community, but when it comes down to what a skate park is, it's an amenity like a playground or anything else that when you have supporting infrastructure around it, it's going to score better. And that's why I think a lot of those developed parks end up, floating to the top or rising to the top of the list in any sort of scoring rubric that you would use. Now, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Vince, but that's kind of what we expected as well. Given all of the other sites we looked at, we assumed that some of the developed park spaces would elevate to the top.
Yeah, that's the most common location for skate parks is existing public parks and recreation facilities. The skate park fits in really well in those types of facilities. So yeah, that's the most common. And yeah, you'll drive yourself crazy if you look at every single potential site in your community. There could be 100. So it's good to kind of just narrow it down. And yeah, I'm excited to get this thing moving.
Very cool. All right, so we'll wait for you to maybe send us that updated presentation. If you think you can get that to us in the next few days or something, we'll make sure to get it included in our park board packet and start this conversation. And once we get some feedback from them, follow up with you and figure out what our next steps are. How do we start moving on this?
Yeah, sounds great.
Perfect. All right, any parting words from anyone? Great. All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate your efforts, Vince, and look forward to seeing the presentation.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. See ya.